With that, we're going to introduce our panel. So we have Professor Hany Farid, Brian Hofer, and Sarah Dean, who will all speak more about themselves. And since this is, again, blinding them, I'm going to close down the presentation and let them take it away.
All right, great. Is this working?
Yep.
Everybody, okay, cool. So I'm Sarah. I will be moderating today. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in EECS, Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and I do work sort of in the area of machine learning and control theory. Some of that work touches upon issues like fairness or user agency, and so as a result, I've become very interested in learning more about how to think about socio-technical issues and how to think at the boundary of something that I'm trained in that's more technical and things that I'm not trained in that are more social. So this is an awesome event that I'm super excited for. I'll also just briefly say that I'm also one of the co-founders of a student group called GEES, which is Graduates for Engaged and Extended Scholarship in Engineering, in Computing and Engineering. Yeah, I think the acronym works out. But if you're interested in that, yeah, watch out for emails, which we try to send broadly. We're planning a few events for later this semester. But otherwise, let's hear from Brian.
Thanks, guys, for having me. I'm Brian Hofer. I chair the City of Oakland's Privacy Commission. We're an advisory body to the City Council. We make recommendations pertaining to surveillance equipment, data collection and retention practices. We might comment on federal or state legislation that might impact us. I'm also the executive director of Secure Justice, which is a nonprofit that I created a year ago. Actually, with a number of folks from Cal are on my board and advisory committee, but really just trying to scale up what I've been doing in the Bay Area and go across the country. I consult with cities now on smart city technology, surveillance technology, of course. Since the Trump election, I've also started segueing into like database security, immigrants' rights issues.
I'm Brian Farid. I'm a professor here at Berkeley. I just moved here about 6 months ago. I have a joint appointment in EECS here in computer science and across the way in the School of Information. I'm trained as an applied mathematician turned computer scientist turned sort of technologist slash activist. And most of my work specializes in analyzing digital imagery. So whether it's an audio, an image, or a video, and determining if it's real or not, and trying to extract information from that, for example, criminal cases, national security cases. That's a big part of what I do. Another part of what I do is think about how you do content moderation at internet scale. So at the scale of 1 billion uploads to Facebook a day, 500 hours of YouTube uploaded a minute, how do you deal with child sexual abuse? How do you deal with terrorism and extremism? How do you deal with non-consensual pornography? How do you deal with mis and disinformation designed to disrupt democratic elections, sow civil unrest, and commit everything from small to large-scale fraud? So how do we essentially take the internet that we know and have loved, I would say, and deal with some of the ugliness and the awfulness that is the internet today, and really leverage the power of technology? I think a lot about the intersection of technology and law and society. I'm not a lawyer, but I spend a disproportionate amount of my time speaking to lawyers these days. And this topic of facial recognition and AI in general, I think, has been sort of on my mind for a while. So I'm really happy to be here to talk about this with Brian and Sarah.
Great. So I think to get started, facial recognition sort of is the motivating technology that we'll be talking about today. And I think recently San Francisco and Oakland and a few other cities, but not too many, have recently banned the police use of facial recognition softwares. How do we sort of think about the trade-off that this creates in terms of public safety versus things like personal privacy?
Please. Okay. And just to add to this, Berkeley has also enacted such a ban. You know, that question assumes, first off, a trade-off. You know, one of the things I have to deal with when I do a lot of surveillance reform efforts is try to convince people that the decision isn't necessarily always binary, that it's privacy or public safety. So, you know, I guess when we start to drill down certain things, try to balance competing interests. We can say there's a trade-off, but I don't accept as true that it's either or, that there's necessarily always a trade-off. The reason we went for the ban first in San Francisco is one, just sort of the symbolism. You know, it was a spiritual home of tech. We had already had 6 ordinances that had a similar vetting framework, and we stuck to facial recognition and ban. Really, just it was timing. The technology was sort of in its infancy, at least on the government side. We can control government actions by policy and by our laws, and so we really just tried to take a stand and say, you know, we're going to keep this genie in the bottle. And that led to Oakland, Berkeley, and then, you know, there's I think 4 cities in Massachusetts that have now done the same thing. It's led to state efforts, or at least moratoriums that might not be outright bans. And what the sort of the arguments we were making, you know, multi-pronged. One, no evidence that it makes us safer. That might not be the strongest argument for brand new technology. There's just not enough data to support it. A bigger argument was, we don't necessarily want to make systems that automate policing, that make it easier to target certain communities, that make it easier to you know, bring penalties against folks. Our criminal justice system is set up with friction points, due process. It's not supposed to be easy for the police. And so there's a large number of us that weren't necessarily trying to make things you know, essentially automated. The other big concern we've had is obviously with facial recognition is the inaccuracy rate. We all know it's going to get better. We never took the position that it wasn't going to get more accurate. But again, with just automating things, we don't want to put more people in harm's way. Another argument we've been sort of raising lately, and this has sort of impacted me personally, and it pertains to any technology, is really this sort of scientific stamp of approval. That a computer or an algorithm told me, you know, X is a dangerous suspect, so it must be true, right? It's not some racist old white sheriff in Mississippi. It's a computer. Computers are reliable. It's an unbiased code. You know, computers work when we turn them on. Our phones work when we use them. So clearly, this must be accurate. And it's the same problem we've run into when police departments have tried to use predictive policing technology. This computer said, I need to go to, you know, East Oakland at 2 a.m. on 98th Avenue, and there's going to be criminals there. One, you know, the local police officer might have been able to tell you that at a much cheaper price, but 2, I now have to justify myself to my supervisor that this algorithm told me that there's crime here. I better arrest somebody. And that's really sort of what I think is at the essence of this trend towards algorithms and smart policing, intelligence-based policing, is that we're sort of pushing off onto technology all our human problems and thinking that it's going to solve them when it might actually just make it much worse.
So I largely agree with what you said. I'm going to add a couple more things to it if it's helpful. So one is, there is this idea that algorithms are going to solve our problems. But the problem, of course, is that algorithms, whether they are being used in the criminal justice system, whether they're being used by the banks, whether they're being used by corporations, are based on historical data. And historical data has problems. And so if you just take historical data and you train an algorithm on it, well, you're simply going to mimic whatever racist, sexist, or problematic we had. So I'll give you an example of this. There are predictive algorithms to predict if when you're arrested, whether you should get be granted bail. And those algorithms are based on historic data. And one of the things that they look at is the number of previous convictions. Well, if you're Black in this country, you're between 5 and 20 times more likely to be arrested, charged, and convicted. So if you look at the number of convictions of Black people, they are on average much higher, so they are considered higher risk. And so now the bail is simply not going to be given to Black people versus white people, and you're simply hiding, as you said, behind a black box algorithm that says, well, we're not racist. And sure, you're not, but the underlying data is racist, and we have to remember that, and that's a real problem with a lot of the algorithms. I think Brian's also right that I don't think it's black and white, pick one or the other, privacy or security. I think there's tension between them, and I think we have to think about that. So here's a couple of thoughts for you to think about. 2013, Boston Marathon, people remember what happened. Pretty horrific act of terror that was devastating, not just to the city and to the people there, but to the country. And I was I helped the FBI on that case. And the reason we found those brothers so quickly was because of public cameras. That's how we found them. It was a combination of CCTV, private cameras, handheld cameras, cobbled together with face recognition. And those guys were identified within hours and eventually caught. I think most people thought that was a success. And I don't think anybody would say, no, we don't want to be able to do that. Now, that's not to say we should put cameras up in every single corner and record everybody, because if you walk down the street and every time you pass a police officer, they would say, please show me your ID, I don't think we would think that that was reasonable. And that's essentially what the cameras are doing as the facial recognition gets very good and as they have access to public information, right? So there's two things that you have to understand is that it's not just the motor vehicle department, it's the Facebook and the Twitter and the whatever else account you have where you put a picture on you. And the folks at Clearview AI have scraped that and now have access to everybody's face. And that means as you walk down the road, there is no more assumption of privacy. And I think that is a little dystopian and a little problematic. But on the other hand, and we were talking about this earlier, is there's a lot of crime in this area. And I get the crime alerts at Berkeley where my students are getting guns stuck to their head and getting robbed and assaulted and shot and beaten up. And that's not okay. And so how do you now balance the right to walk down the street and not get assaulted and the right to have privacy? And a couple of thoughts on that. So one is, I don't think the only answer to that are cameras with face recognition. We can do other things. That's probably the cheapest way to do it. We could pour a couple $1 billion into policing and have better patrols. We could have better infrastructure. We could have less poverty. We could have less homelessness. It's just way, way more expensive to do that. So let's stop pretending that the only way to reduce crime is simply to put cameras up and catch the bad guys, right? We can prevent that in other ways. And the other is there are technological, and Brian and I were talking about this earlier, is that you can imagine a system that allows you to see what's happening on a street corner only after the fact, but not in live. Every time you pass by, it does face recognition, it tells you who it is, but it records it, it encrypts it, and it's stored on a secure server. And then maybe if there's a crime with a warrant, with the right judicial oversight, you can go in and very selectively look and say, we know there's a crime there, and we would like to see what actually happened there. And there's ways of thinking about how to do that. You want to ensure that there's not mission creep, that some judge isn't signing off on absolutely everything, to sort of go in. So I think we have to sort of strike a balance. And I don't think the answer is no cameras anywhere, ever, no face recognition. And the answer isn't put cameras up on every corner and we'll be safe and everything will be fine. There's going to be some compromise between those things. And I think that's one of the things we should be talking about here.
Yeah, like a lot of the, and I mean this with all respect, and I say to the smart kids, you folks, when I talk to the smart kids, I don't.
He didn't look at me, by the way, when he said that. Just for reference.
That I don't. Most folks don't give me the sense that they think this is going to work at a comfortable level in real time when use of force is involved. It works really well. Facial recognition works really well when you're standing against a blue square at the DMV, exactly 4 feet away from the camera in perfect lighting. That's not real life. And to have someone on the other end, whether it's the body camera or Google glasses on a police officer that might pull a gun because you've been misidentified, obviously I don't need to lead you to a conclusion. And so in order to get that sort of public safety, maybe that trade-off that you're sort of talking about, to me it means we need a massive database of everybody's photos constantly updated. The way I looked 10 years ago is not how I look today. And we need me in probably different lighting and different scenarios, different backgrounds in order to be able to accurately identify it. So I don't think it's realistic in that sense, at least not into a comfort level that we'd want to use it. To their credit, the police departments of San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland, they agreed with our ban on real-time use. That it was a very good faith argument that they were putting forth about after-the-fact use, about trying to get through footage fast. And so I'm sure we'll discuss other arguments that we made on that. I think the Boston Marathon bombing, along with every terrorist attack, has shown us that technology doesn't prevent lone wolf attacks. It's never going to do that. And so we need to definitely pull people back away from that ledge.
So I guess Brian, you mentioned that one of the reasons that some of this legislation was pushed through for the police or for governments is because governments are something that we can control, that they're sort of transparent in that way. And then Hany, you mentioned Clearview, I think, which if not everybody is aware, Clearview is a company, I guess like a pretty small startup, which sort of scraped images of people with associated names or other information from public websites, social media profiles, all that kind of stuff, which was like against terms of service and illegal. But once they have that database, they have the information, and they offered that database and the facial recognition matching service to retail stores, police officers, etc. So sort of with that example in mind, I guess, what are the limitations of using laws as a way to prevent abuse in this space? And what kind of laws would be useful to protect digital identities?
So I'm a fan of the Illinois biometric law when it comes to the private side. I personally get nervous about trying to intrude too much into private activities. One, I don't necessarily think the government has authority in some areas. I do want to be careful not to stifle innovation. There could be, you know, we always think of sort of negative unintended consequences. There can be positive unintended consequences. When I was at the meeting I was referring to earlier with the FBI and there was U.S. attorneys there, and this U.S. attorney was informing me how she was using facial recognition to go through what was it, Red Book, and looking for like trafficking victims. It's pretty hard to make an argument against using the technology for that when there's, you know, sex trafficking of teenagers out there, and that wasn't something that, you know, we originally thought of. But on the private side, you can't just go out usually and stop a private party from collecting data that's out in the public arena. So, for example, 3 states have tried to outlaw license plate collection. Vigilant is out of Livermore in the Deep East Bay. They're a very large vendor of license plate readers, and they've successfully challenged all 3 laws, won easily their court decisions. And it was, to me, a very strange but clever argument. They argued essentially a First Amendment right, that they were essentially like a newspaper. You go out, you collect information, you repackage it, you sell it to your customers. And that argument prevailed. And so we're also seeing that, you know, now when it comes to various algorithms and facial recognition. It's like they're just collecting information on people and they want to go use it for marketing purposes. I think Illinois has showed us how to address that. I'm going to actually try to do it in Oakland at the local level first. There are some actually laws that just got introduced in Sacramento that are going to try to regulate the private side, but essentially, you know, get consent first, fully informed consent, true consent, you know, not just a little notice that's in a corner of your store saying, hey, I use facial recognition, but actually informing people and getting a written release. Now that alone is a friction point. That's going to dramatically slow down any form of mass surveillance, because in order to get that, it's going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of resources. But there are people out there that do have those resources, so it's still something that we want to monitor. Portland is working on a ban on both the public and private side. And although, of course, you know, I can't see their confidential city attorney memo, what I'm being told by the folks I'm consulting with is essentially they're making an argument that it is a public safety issue, that the city, or you can even go larger, say the state has an interest in ensuring the public safety of its residents, which is obviously true. Not quite sure if that's going to stretch far enough to say that that public safety interest can prohibit. They're actually trying to prohibit private use of facial recognition, and I could see that getting a court challenge.
I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill, and you know, it'd be nice to think we can regulate our way out of this, but there's almost no evidence that we can, particularly in the technology sector. And there's a couple of problems. One is we still have senators who think it's funny to brag about not knowing how to send email. I mean, you know, that may have been cute 20 years ago, but it's not cute now. I mean, you are the senators who are literally regulating the technology industry, and you're pretending, first of all, that email is something sophisticated, which I don't know what bothers me more. So our legislators are woefully underprepared. And to your opening statement, Sarah, so are their staffers. Most of the staffers there, with due respect to the political science and history and English majors, They are not technologists, and that's a real problem because they don't understand technology. And two is technology moves spectacularly fast. So legislate for today, 12 months from now, there's going to be a whole thing we haven't even thought about. And so it's really hard to regulate our way out of this in a way that is sort of thoughtful and doesn't have unintended consequences and doesn't squash innovation. I'm frankly far more worried about Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos than I am about the government. I think what the companies are doing with essentially almost no real regulation at the federal level or state level, minus Illinois, of course, is, I mean, it's horrifying. And 20 years on, we've all woken up and we have a pretty bad hangover of what is the internet today. And I think everybody's scrambling. So the Europeans, for better or worse, are a little bit ahead of the curve. GDPR was good. It's not perfect, but it was a good first cut. There's a lot of regulation coming out. There's a lot of language, I should say, coming out of the EU, where in the UK, where they're trying to figure out how to regulate in this space. And hopefully that will start to get exported the way GDPR got exported out also. But I think look, we should absolutely try to get sensible regulation. We should try to convince the companies just to be good citizens and knock it off. But also we as citizens have to start putting pressure. We have a little bit of power here because we can delete Facebook and we can delete Twitter. In fact, I think you should. I think they're awful. Hi, Facebook. YouTube, get off of YouTube too, by the way. I know this is going on YouTube, it's awful. But we also can try to affect change by innovating. We can try to create, as computer scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs, better services that are more respectful of privacy, that are more respectful of content moderation, and that are more respectful of an honest dialogue where people aren't harassed every day and threatened every day. So we just have to build better products. We have some crappy products right now, and I would argue, by the way, that the reason they're so crappy is because the underlying business model is rotten to the core, which is that they pretend to give away everything for free, and in return, they want every ounce of your data, and your face, and your location, and then they're going to target advertise you, and that is the rot that is the modern internet today. The business model stinks, and it is what's driving a lot of the problems that we see around privacy and content moderation, because there is simply no incentive to get it right. At least with the government, say what you will about the government, at least they're reasonably incentivized to get it right because they can get elected, they can get voted out of office. But you can't say the same thing about Mark Zuckerberg.
I'd like to add, I think we have existing laws that are pretty sufficient in a lot of areas. I absolutely agree that what you might adopt today could be outdated. And it's a good thing, in my opinion, that the law moves slow. We don't want to make big leaps. We want to make sure it's well reasoned and that we have a good reasoning to get to some new legal conclusion. But California has a state right to privacy. We have both a statutory and common law right to what's called right to publicity. It's Civil Code 3344. But essentially that you can't use my likeness or other identifying information without my consent. And those things, they just don't get litigated or enforced. So I think often when same as like police use of force, we have all the laws we need. We just don't actually hold people accountable. We don't prosecute. It was a really big deal when Facebook got the $550 million, entered into the $550 million settlement agreement in Illinois. Whereas in Europe, it's like a $5 billion GDPR penalty. If you have this really crushing liability out there, it's gonna change behavior. And those laws, generally in most places, already exist. We're just not doing a good job of either educating the public to take advantage of them or getting our attorney generals to start suing on this stuff. And I kind of suspect the Clearview case might lead to that because it's really motivated. I mean, the Sacramento legislation deadline was February 21st, and I was up there on the 20th, and it was going crazy with everybody trying to figure out and introduce biometric legislation. Yeah. So it's definitely leading to new laws.
Cool. All right. On a slightly pessimistic note, I'm going to ask, what is sort of the most likely worst case outcome if sort of data protection or facial recognition technologies are either misregulated or unregulated? What are you most worried about?
I'll tell you what I'm most worried about. Well, first, I still can't figure out, are there independent writers that create Black Mirror episodes, and then China watches them and incorporates them. or is it the reverse? China is telling these script writers, hey, we're doing this, go create an episode. Like, Black Mirror is my nightmare. And really what China is doing to the Uyghurs right now is my nightmare. Complete, full-on, unstoppable dystopian surveillance nightmare. You know, the panopticon. That's where I think we could get. Americans are really great at sleeping on their rights. Also, some stuff has been concealed. You know, I don't think license plate readers would have been so prevalent if we would have known about them 10 years ago when they were first getting introduced in most of our jurisdictions. You know, if you don't know about it, you can't regulate it. That's one of the models that I work on mostly with the ACLU, their surveillance ordinance. It forces all the technology out into the open, requiring a public approval of both like the funding and use policy stages, so that we actually get a bite at the apple to regulate that type of stuff. But, so yeah, I would say what's happening to the Uyghurs is my big fear.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, what's happening there is probably the nightmare situation. It's the one we all worried about. I was talking to a colleague of mine who worked on some of the early facial recognition that is probably being used by the Chinese to oppress thousands, tens of thousands of people. And he is horrified that his technology is being used. And he said, if I had known, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have published the paper. I mean, sure, maybe somebody else would have, but at least it wouldn't have been on him. So I think that's also on us as technologists, is to really start thinking about how our technology is going to be misused. And not so much, you know, let's do this because we can, but maybe we should ask, should we be doing this? And I don't think as a community, we do a very good job of that. So I do worry about that. You know, we talk about dystopia a lot. I feel like we might actually be there. You know, I mean, if you look at what's happening in this country with, you know, everything from President Trump to coronavirus to fires, and it just, you know, I was walking on campus the other day and like half the people have masks on. I'm like, this is not normal. This is not the normal world we're living in. And that is not the first time since I've moved here where I've walked around campus and half the people are wearing masks because either they're scared about the coronavirus, or I wouldn't shake his hand today because I'm so freaked out about the coronavirus, by the way, or because the smoke from the fires are, you know, coming in. So, you know, it is one of those things where I feel like you just wake up one day and it's dystopian. And I don't think it's, you know, I don't think you sort of predict where it's coming. And I would argue that the internet that we know today and that I've loved for many years, I'm not sure that it's an overall good anymore. And as a technologist, that is really deeply troubling to me. And because the financial interests are so phenomenally big, if you go to Capitol Hill today, 4 of the top 5 lobbyists in terms of dollar spent is tech. Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, they are spending tens of millions of dollars, both here, in Brussels, and every country. And while Mark Zuckerberg, out of one side of his face, is saying, you should regulate us, out of the other side of his face, he's telling everybody not to regulate us. Can't have it both ways. So I worry that the corporate interests are so dominating the dialogue that we are going to make bad decision after bad decision. And that to me is very worrying. And I don't think we're actually, it's out of the question that we could end up somewhere like that. I remind people that there are literally today kids in cages at the border. That is not out of the question that we do this in this country, and that should freak everybody out. It freaks me out, and it's depressing.
So I think you bring up a good point that sort of as a technologist, like these are things that maybe we have worked on in the past, or, you know, 20 years later, suddenly like this cute project where you recognize people's faces or whatever and adjust the temperature of a room, like has sort of a different meaning. So I guess what responsibility do developers of this type of technology have, and how can they sort of exert power in that space? Like, what opportunities are there?
I'll take this one first. So, you know, look, for a long time, 2 things were true. One was nothing really worked in computer vision. It just didn't work. And so who cares if you put the code out there, right? It was crap anyway. And the benefits of open sourcing were really tremendous, right? We got Linux because it's open source, and it's amazing. And lots of cool things happened because we just innovated, and it was an open source community, and we shared, it was wonderful, and it was very creative. But that, as of the last few years, is no longer true. We are seeing our technology being weaponized, whether that's deepfake technology to create non-consensual pornography, whether that's face recognition to be used by totalitarian regimes, whether that's bot technology to spam Twitter and Facebook and YouTube to disrupt the democratic election, and a long litany of ways that we have seen technology abused. And so what we as a community have to do, and this isn't just computer scientists, but it's engineers and it's technologists, have to stop saying, well, this is just cool. I hear this over and over and over again, and it's not fun and games anymore. People are literally dying. And by the way, in the AI world, so I came out of a robotics lab, and one of the big applications of computer vision back then was to do recognition to drop bombs on people. And a lot of us were like, no, we don't want to do that. That's terrible. We don't want to automate bombing people. This is, we want humans in the loop. And so, I think some communities have thought a little bit more about this. Biologists think routinely about this. Physicists think about this. Chemists think about this. But we are an incredibly immature field, and frankly, we're just a bunch of nerds. And I say that as being one of them. And so I just don't think we've sort of thought through these things. So why is it that every computer scientist is not taking an ethics course and a philosophy course and a history course? The biologists all have to take an ethics course, right? And by the way, there's been this sort of thinking for a long time, it's technology, right? But if a biologist developed a deadly virus out of ingredients in their kitchen, nobody would think that it was a good idea for them to say, let's put this on the internet and let's see what happens next, right? That's not a good idea, but that is what we as computer scientists do on a routine basis, right? We do something, we put the code on GitHub, we write an archive paper, and we move on and be like, let's see what happens next, right? And look, that's fun and games for a while, but at some point that's not fun anymore, right? Because the stuff is getting weaponized, and we need a framework and a scaffolding to think about this and take it more seriously. And I've tried to have this conversation with my colleagues at the academic level and at the industry level, and I have to say, more often than not, I just get yelled at. There's vitriolic responses. You're trying to stop me from publishing a paper. First of all, that's not at all true. Although it wouldn't kill you to publish a few less papers. But I do think that the community really needs to look very hard at ourselves and how we are pushing these things forward. And I think the one good thing about, as you said, Clearview and a lot of the AI and the face recognition is that it's sort of bubbling up. And I think it's going to take a little bit while longer. I think young people like you, like people in the crowd here, I think are a little more thoughtful about this than people like me, or my age, I should say. So I think it's still like a few years away, but it's going to come. And I'm just like, just get out ahead of it. Why do you have to wait for the disaster to come before you get out ahead of it? Just get out ahead of it before the disaster.
Our Privacy Commission has had an interesting sort of split between folks with law degrees and technologists. And it's that sort of age-old philosophical split. Technologists, can we collect it? The legal side, should we? Right? We see that even on a very privacy-focused, motivated group of commissioners. One of our original commissioners was Deirdre Mulligan from high school and law school. And we lost her because she got appointed to DARPA's ethics board. She was the first attorney in their 30-plus year history to ever serve on the ethics board, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
That exactly underscores what you just said. And I've been pleasantly surprised, and I will admit that I was completely disbelieved that any good would come out of it when Axon created an ethics board, and now other surveillance vendors are doing that. I had some very good friends, mentors, that refused to be on the ethics board because they're like, we're going to get co-opted. This is clearly going to be just, I don't know what our surveillance equivalent is of whitewashing or greenwashing, but that's what was going to happen. And then I have other mentors that served on that board, and kudos to them. They've come out, they convinced Axon not to go with facial recognition for now on their body cameras. They just wrote another great report about the privacy impact from license plate readers and the predictive technology that most ALPR vendors are coming out with now. So they're actually holding the line. I've been pleasantly surprised. I hope more vendors see that as sort of a competitive advantage. We recently had a shot spotter come through us, which is a gunshot detection system, but they've also purchased an analytics company. They want to start incorporating predictive policing. And this is the one company in that space that I trusted, because they just make everything open. They let you look at the model, come on in, watch us. We'll show you the values we're using, how we're weighting them, like extremely transparent. I'm like, all right, I can work with you. And I got real nervous when ShopSpotter purchased them because they fight subpoenas and public record requests. But I was talking to some of the principals, and they're like, they're totally leaving us alone. Everything's still published up on the website. Everything's been transparent. And so there is an awareness in the commercial market that they might be able to monetize privacy. They might actually be able to monetize responsible behavior. And I don't care. I don't care if that's your only motivation. You know, it doesn't need to be altruistic. If you want to make money by having better products, like you just said, amen to that. You know, I can get behind that. So I am encouraged by that.
So I guess both of you mentioned the idea of open source software in sort of different contexts, like whether it's making things very open as you develop technologies, which potentially could be used for harm, or it's open source privacy software, which is actually a method for trusting it better. How do you think like open source and transparency, how does that exist today in sort of like this more corporate technology world? And like, what are the implications for privacy, open data sets, those sorts of things?
I think there's a little tension there. So I do a lot of work on the security side of things. So I developed a technology, for example, that's in worldwide use to stop the distribution of child sexual abuse material to the tunes of hundreds of millions of pieces of material that make its way through the internet every year. And we don't publish it. We don't, so the companies that use it, you know, have the code, they can see it, but we don't publish it. And we don't publish it because if we did, you'd know how to work around it. And so there's tension there. And so the courts have seen it. Obviously, so when somebody gets caught and they get prosecuted, the courts can say, we can validate if this works. And so, and now it's been adjudicated. And we had long discussions about it. And you know, obviously you want as much transparency as you can have. It's generally the right thing to do. But in this case, because of the way the technology worked, as soon as we put it out there, it was going to be dead in the water. And we just didn't think it was worth it. So we decided for a semi-transparent process where the companies that were deploying it had access to it, the lawyers had access to it, the judges had access to it, but we were careful about the deployment. I don't think that has to be the same model for everything, but I don't think it's, coming back to what you were saying earlier, it doesn't have to be either transparent or not transparent. There are things in the middle that you can do. I think, however, for predictive algorithms for deciding on bail, that should be 100% transparent. There should not be state secrets on that because there doesn't have to be. And so companies could say, well, you know, we are worried about our IP. Well, we have mechanisms for dealing with that. The courts know how to deal with IP issues, right? I serve as an expert witness on many patent cases. I've seen incredibly sensitive things. You come in under court order, you look at these things, you figure out if they work or not, you verify them, and then you can then use them in the courts once they're verified. So I think there are mechanisms in place and legal protections in place to protect the corporate interest. And I'm with you. You can make a buck, but yeah, that's fine. But you got to be doing the right thing at the same time. And then, of course, the interest that we all have to be sort of fair and unbiased and accurate.
I think this is the hardest thing that we're dealing with now, at least at the municipal level, where we've seen the immediate benefit of like smart city applications and this trend towards open data sets. You know, Oakland works with Code for America, like, you know, they work with a lot of cities. We're pushing things out on the web so that folks can find them. You know, we don't want to stifle any creativity, but it is amazing also how lax people are at publishing all this information and how easy it is to, you know, reverse engineer or just easily identify people. And I think that risk is going to dramatically increase as we all move towards a smart city future. And we get solicited by vendors all the time at the Privacy Commission to come in, you know, promise us, you know, miracles, you know, but we just want to own your data. So that's always our first big issue, is the contract fight. Who's going to own the data? And before we had a Privacy Commission, Oakland didn't even push back. You guys can own everything. We don't care at all. And you know, once we got involved, we started making the privacy argument, and then the city started making a second argument. We're like, well, somebody's making money off of it. It should be us, you know, the city, the taxpayers. And so that practice has mostly changed to where we control the data in the first place, so it's not going out the back door being used for a different purpose. I forget that cafe in San Francisco, they went out of business. They sold all their video footage that ended up getting used for machine learning, you know, and ended up in China. We've seen stories like that where data sets go out. We no longer ever in any of our policies promise people that the data will be truly, fully anonymized or that it's even a possibility. You know, we just say we're going to do our best to, you know, obscure it. That we're going to do our best to aggregate it and not make it so easy to reverse engineer. But at some point, somebody's going to do it. I've had folks in my own privacy camp say, hey, let's just democratize everything. If the police get to look through the cameras, I'm going to look through the cameras. You know, just make it, let everybody see it. You know, we all get. And
what could possibly go
right,
wrong?
exactly. Like that's the most terrifying pull I've ever heard. It's like, no, you know, it's like you know, I was like, I don't want my neighbors looking through my window either. It's like, you know, there's just all these consequences that people haven't thought through. And I am excited at least at the local level where we can have more of an impact with legislation that I've seen a culture of mindfulness take place. You know, the feds, you know, they're not doing anything. The U.S. House Oversight Committee, you know, they called us up after the San Francisco ban, and you know, they were interested for 3 months in facial recognition, and then it just, you know, and then it just died on the vine again. And
well, it's also because they're getting lobbied to death about these things.
Also true, right. So, right. There's also the money, but you know, at least at the local level, which I would argue, and most folks probably agree with, is where most of the data is collected anyway. We are having a meaningful impact, while still, I think, comfortably moving towards the amazing benefits we are going to see from open data sets and the ability to analyze them. The analytics that are going to lead to a truly smart city future that maybe one day the Bay Bridge won't be congested. You know, maybe, you know, the pollution in the air will increase. And so I am excited about that. We want to be careful not to stifle that part as well.
All right, so I think I'll do one more question and then maybe we'll open up to sort of live audience questions. But the last question, I guess, while we get ready for that, what are sort of everyday things that like individuals can be doing to protect their identities, like with regards to, you know, just digital information and also specifically facial recognition?
Delete Facebook, delete Twitter, get off of YouTube. TikTok, I'm on the fence about, so I think it's great. You know, this is where it's really difficult, right? Because we're all online. It'd be nice to think that, look, you can sort of get off, but you can't. And sort of the cat is out of the bag. So it's not entirely clear what you can do to protect yourself anymore. Because, you know, once that information has gone on there, and even stuff that you don't even know is on there, your friends are taking pictures of you. Even if you're not on Facebook, your friend's on Facebook, and they're taking a picture of you, and you're on Facebook. And even, I'm not on Facebook or Twitter, and they have a profile on me because every website I go to has cookies, and they're tracking everything. So, you know, I guess you can get off the internet. I mean, that sounds pretty cool, actually. Yeah, that sounds even better. Honestly, I don't know. I actually don't think that there are easy answers here. I think, you know, you've been looking at your phone. I've been looking at my phone. We all have a phone. Everybody's, you know, it's really hard to separate yourself these days. And I think that's part of the trap that is the internet today. I hope you have a better answer than I do. Jeez. Okay, so he doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, the low-hanging fruit, which doesn't really work for your face, but use Signal, you know, end-to-end encryption, free for texting and voice calls, you know, encrypt your laptops. But where I really focus a lot of my efforts is this sort of premise that the minute I walk outside my house, I've surrendered my privacy interest. Right, and so we're kind of trying to create a new term like public privacy interest, right? We say there's no reasonable expectation if you're out in the town square. Okay, maybe, but you know, if we go have a conversation over there in the corner, you can see us, but we clearly intended it to be confidential. I do have some expectation of privacy. I have freedom of association and other civil liberties. It's not just necessarily a true, pure privacy interest. And so what we've been trying to work and get law enforcement to understand, because they're just used to, hey, if there's a protest, you know, 1A activity, well, I'm gonna go put a camera on it. Is there any violence? Did you have a reason to be there? So we try to create, you know, thresholds to use equipment in certain places. And I think with facial recognition, you know, at least in the Bay Area where we have favorable circumstances, elected leaders to push that type of legislation, we could do it. I think the biggest thing is talk to your friends, because you're right. If you have all the Facebook settings in the world and your friend doesn't, and they're tagging you on all the photos, it didn't do you any good. So talking to folks in your own network, of getting them to take serious their privacy settings would go a long way.
Here's the last thing, by the way, vote. I just saw that the voter turnout for people your age was pathetic this year. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but if people don't vote, you get the government that we have. So I know it doesn't seem like it matters, but I swear to God it does.
All right, so I guess let's open it to audience questions. I know there's some stuff that I didn't get
Hi, I was just going to ask, do you think a better business model will be possible for the internet advertisement? Because you mentioned earlier that the business model is not good for. So maybe do you think we should be getting paid for our data?
Yeah.
Or
Good.
would there be?
So, couple of thoughts. One is we have an existence proof that you can build at internet scale something that works, which is Wikipedia. It works, right? And it's amazing. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's amazing because they don't have a business model. So that's not exactly the answer. I'm going to get to that in a second. But what you hear from Facebook and Google is the internet is too big. It's just too hard to do this. And that's objectively untrue because Wikipedia is a model of success of what you can do at scale, right? So what is the business model? So I don't know if this is the right answer, but here's a thought. What you have to understand is that when Facebook and Google and Twitter all came up, we weren't comfortable with e-commerce, right? You guys are all pretty young here, but we have to understand is people our age, when e-commerce came, we were like, put your credit card online? Are you out of your mind? Like there was a real hurdle. And so when these companies came up, the big question was, what's the business model? Because nobody's buying stuff online. This is before Amazon was Amazon, and before iTunes, and before in-game purchases, and Netflix and Spotify, and these monthly charges that we're now all perfectly comfortable with. And so I would argue the reason we have this business model is because nobody thought there was another business model. And so they were like, screw it. Let's just take their data and sell them advertising, give them advertising, because we're not going to get a monthly fee from them. I would argue that a lot of people now would pay a nominal monthly fee for a better service, a better YouTube and a better Facebook and a better Twitter, where they're not, grabbing every ounce of data from you and target advertising you and doing God knows what else with your data. So I think that the world has changed quite a bit in the last 20 years. And I think we're sort of at that right time where somebody may say, for $1.99 a month, I'm willing to pay for better privacy and better service and better content. And so I think, you have to worry a little bit about the socioeconomic divide. I don't want to get into a world where rich people can have privacy and poor people can't. So you have to sort of think through that business model of how do you make this really, truly accessible? And I don't mean just in the US, you got to think globally now. So what do you do when $1.99 is what people are making a month, right? Not a fraction of an hour. So I think you have to work through some of those economies. But I would like to see better business models come up. And I think that they're there. It's just that, right now there's no oxygen in the room because we have the monopoly that is Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And every time somebody comes up with an idea, they either replicate it and destroy them or they absorb them. And so we need oxygen in the room, and that means we need regulatory relief. And when Google tells you, by the way, when the feds are starting to talk about breaking up monopolies, Google is going to scream up and down, no, this is going to stifle innovation. What you need to know is that the reason why Google exists is because the Department of Justice went after Microsoft. Because Microsoft was stifling innovation with their monopoly, and Google had no oxygen. And when the DOJ stepped in and slapped Microsoft around, that's when Google emerged. So don't let Google, sell you that. They are the absolute ideal case of when government steps in and knocks off the monopoly that we can actually have real innovation.
I think it was Governor Newsom that sort of introduced this idea about half a year ago of a privacy tax or premium, where they would pay. Companies would be required to pay us for our data. So instead of being surveillance value, that we would start getting some sort of premium for it. I'm curious. I could see that at least having a benefit when it comes to startups that aren't so cash rich that they could just pay whatever. I think a lot of these startups, their really primary motive is just go out, soak up as much data, and then get acquired by another company to make more money. And so if you had this tax in place, they wouldn't be able to pull that off. So I do think it has maybe some legs there. You know, he hasn't really fleshed that proposal out, so you know, the devil will be in the details. We'll see what happens.
That's cool.
So a lot of people on like the opposite side of this argument argue that like if we don't do like if we don't like develop our faithful like technology or these technologies that can be harmful to society, then other countries will, and then they'll use it again. That's what I've heard as the opposite side of the argument. And I was wondering like what's your response to that?
Heard this argument too, and I've never really understood it. So you hear this argument is that if we don't do this, China's going to do it, they're going to win. Win what? This isn't a foot race. I mean, I don't know what we're talking about here. So, you know, there is this narrative going around is we have to do this to compete with China, but I don't know what we're competing against. So I'm not sure I actually understand that argument, and I'm not sure how China is going to use face recognition against me here in Berkeley. So I don't want to be too dismissive of that, but that argument has never really made a lot of sense to me. I just don't really buy that argument.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with that. You know, maybe if it's some other sort of AI weapon systems or something, you know, maybe that argument has a little credibility. But as far as just a surveillance of my body, of my biometrics, it's a non-argument.
Yeah. I mean, you know, if you're worried about China, delete TikTok, right? I mean, I'm just saying. Sorry, guys.
We're getting a lot of it.
That's right. Good thing I have tenure.
Yeah, so earlier on you were talking about regulation being really hard, especially with so much of the regulators being not big technologists. So to me, I don't know, it feels like we need an FDA. Like, you know, you can't just introduce a new drug or a new food without passing inspection.
Yeah.
So it feels like that's necessary in this realm. How do we do that with all the capital interest that Google and Facebook is sorting out? And this notion of like, yeah, stifling innovation is sort of always rings hollow to me. It's like, yeah, nuclear weapons designer can be so innovative, but we don't care about that.
Yeah, right.
We don't allow it.
I think you're right. I have, for the last 5 years, I spent a good chunk of my time on Capitol Hill and in Brussels, in the UK, and other governments, state and federal level. And I've been beating this drum exactly what you just said. We need a new agency. We need an agency that is going to be thinking about these technology issues the way the FDA does, the way the FAA does, the way the Department of Transportation does. Here's the rub. It's not really a US agency. It's actually an international agency. The internet doesn't know boundaries. So I've also been spending time at the UN, trying to get the UN to do something. I mean, geez, you think our government's dysfunctional. Gotta go to the UN. God, now I've pissed off the UN.
Just start moving my chair.
Yeah, that's right. That's a really good idea, actually. So that's one point I struggle is I don't know if this should be a US thing. I've been talking to folks in the EU about this, because at least that brings in a number of different countries, and it's getting a little bit of legs in the EU, some regulatory bodies there, because I think they take these issues much more seriously than we do. But I'm with you, man. I think we really need lots of smart people, some lawyers, some technologists, some ethicists, to really start thinking about how do you regulate in this space. Because it's been 20 years of essentially completely hands off, and this is the mess that we have today.
I don't have a great answer to that. I agree with where you're going, but just point you in a direction to watch for the next couple of years at the local level. San Francisco, adopted a set of privacy principles, surveillance ordinance, the facial recognition ban. They've created a new chief privacy officer position. And what caught our attention, they've just created an Office of Emerging Technology. And the sort of parameters of that jurisdiction and what it really is going to mean are still being developed. But that they've created that to address that concern. And if that catches on in San Francisco, it's going to spread.
And so, thanks first off, thank you for the design and organizing this panel. Really interesting discussion. So I'm interested in a world where you don't end up like China with this dystopian surveillance state, but we have facial recognition that works. ubiquitous, we send them recognized. What do you think in this sort of society we still have to worry about with facial recognition technology?
Well, okay, so today we still have a big problem with face recognition is not good with people who aren't white. It's just not good. And part of that is, well, I think most of it is just the people developing these algorithms are all white. And the way they get the training set is they get a bunch of pictures of people they know. And so we're training on a bunch of white people. And mostly dudes, by the way, very few women, because tech still is incredibly underrepresented. So we actually have a pretty big accuracy problem. And that is, things have gotten better over the years, but they're still not amazing. And then the question you want to ask is, well, what's the accuracy rate? Is it 99% 1 of 100 times? That's really bad, actually, when you deploy the internet scale. And so I think accuracy is a huge issue. The bias, the fairness, to make sure that when you define accuracy, it's not super accurate for a bunch of white dudes, but for a bunch of people of color, it's really bad. But it's not that they're a relatively smaller percent of the population, so it's all fine. Don't worry about it. I think that's a big issue. And then I think the other issue is how do you secure this data, right? So Clearview, the knuckleheads of Clearview, I'm going to add that to my list. They got hacked. Of course they got hacked. And now we have their client list. So how do you now secure all of this data that you're collecting, right? So, I think that it's one of those things where you had the right line, which is friction in the system is good. Friction is good sometimes. And the problem with technology is there's very little friction in the system. And so I think, you want this to be difficult. You want to jump through your question, right? You want regular. The reason why, except for the Boeing 737 Maxes, right? Boeing add to the list. Planes don't fall out of the sky very often. I'm old enough to remember my parents had this car called a Pinto. And the Pinto, if you know this, you literally would back up into a fire hydrant at 2 miles an hour and the car would literally explode, right? That doesn't happen anymore because we sue the crap out of the car industry, right? So when we have a retrieve at the other end, it actually works out well, and we don't have in the technology sector. So I can't sue when the algorithm gets broken. And until I have that regulatory relief, I don't trust the companies to do the right thing. And so I don't want to see wide deployment until I trust that they have this big, fat, whopping incentive not to lose billions and billions of dollars by screwing it up. And when that happens, well, then we can have that conversation.
The problem with ubiquitous, perfectly accurate facial recognition is really, to me, it's the same problem we have with any surveillance technology and just policing, is that certain communities are impacted more than others. And by automating it, by letting it spread everywhere, to me, I just see more of the same problems we have today. That until you cure racism, disproportionate sentencing, mandatory, like all these problems we have in our criminal justice system, we're just going to accelerate those. I don't think as a society, I hope as a society, we aren't consenting to being tracked everywhere we go. I think that, so what if it doesn't misidentify anyone anymore? I'm equally as terrified of a perfectly accurate facial recognition system if it is everywhere, because that control leads to mischief, leads to misconduct on both the public and private side. I also agree that we haven't seen any systems that are bulletproof. There's always data breaches. The 6 largest data breaches in history are the United States federal government. Mm-hmm. So when they're always asking for the backdoor to the encryption, it's like, we're going to trust you guys. You can't secure your own data. Like we would never trust you. So to me, I work really hard to ensure that facial recognition isn't ubiquitous, because between license plate readers and cell phone trackers and cell tower dumps and Wi-Fi and just everything else, it's like I'm already losing my right to be anonymous in public. Our courts have said and our society have said for hundreds of years that I have the right to be anonymous in public, that I don't have to show that ID as I walk around. And that's what China is forcing the Uyghurs to do. They're specifically looking for facial characteristics that are unique to Uyghurs. And that's not the society that I want to live in. And so I hope we never get there to where we have to answer your question.
Hi, thank you. So first I want to frame facial recognition as a tool embedded by design with the values of the technology company to which power is delegated. So kind of under this framework, it seems like a really critical stage for cities considering adapting this tool into their ecosystem would be the procurement procedure, because this is a place to assess impacts, look at conflicting values. And so I'm curious, what does procurement procedure look like right now at the city level? And what is the role of technology expertise, especially in local government that's considering taking on technological tools like facial recognition?
So we have 7 jurisdictions that operate under the ACLU model. The acronym is CCOPS, Community Control Over Policing Surveillance. It's a procurement ordinance. So we get in right at the front, even before you apply for a grant. You have to come in and go through this vetting process. It requires an upfront analysis, and ideally any of the concerns that have been raised in that analysis get mitigated by the proposed use policy that you come to us with. In Oakland, we have a privacy commission that vets that and makes a recommendation to the city council. They retain the ultimate authority to adopt it. The other jurisdictions, it's just the city council kind of hits them as a cold reader, which has been very concerning to me. Berkeley has that same ordinance. Right now, they've got a body camera policy and license plate reader policy in front of them that are terrible. They're the worst I've ever read, actually. And I had to write a nasty little letter and postpone a vote. But when we have subject matter experts, which we do in Oakland on our privacy commission, we vet all those things. And most of us, I'd say all of us, we know what we're talking about. So we've been able to weigh, and the model itself requires a determination, both at our privacy commission level and then the city council makes the exact same one, that the benefits outweigh the concerns. If we're going to put this technology out into the wild, we better be ensured that if our use policy is followed, that it's going to the best extent possible, protect our civil liberties. And there's also a financial, taxpayer protection component to it as well, but it's generally civil liberties. Right now, everybody, every administrative staffer does have to go to the city council for like contract approval, for funding approval, but that's pretty much it. And I've read at this point, I don't know, 30,000 staff reports, and it's bare minimum. You don't get enough information to really make that truly informed decision that we're making in the 7 jurisdictions that have this model. San Francisco got all the attention for the San Francisco ban. That was 1 paragraph in a 12-page law. There was an entire vetting framework that the folks now have to go through. And San Francisco already had a technology committee established, which is very sophisticated. So now they serve a similar role as the privacy commission in Oakland.
So thank you very much. This is an incredibly insightful conversation. I'm a grad student in the sociology department, and I'm curious to hear if you were to tell people in social sciences, if you were to help design a research for them to take on about these issues, is there any kind of examples on what you would like them to kind of start digging into that you think is helpful?
Yeah, that's a big question.
I always want to find out, we see a lot of like self-reported Pew surveys and other organizations. Changes in behavior, self-censoring. Is it real? If I don't know I'm under surveillance, am I going to change my behavior? Maybe the fact that we're now telling people they're under surveillance is causing that change in behavior, and if we would have just kept quiet, they would have gone about their normal activities. That's definitely something that I personally want to understand and get actual data behind rather than just sort of anecdotal stories.
This is a little bit different than the conversation we've had, but this is something I've been really interested in. So I think I said at some point in this evening that one of the things I work on is content moderation. Right? How do you deal with bad people doing bad things to people on the internet? And one of the pushbacks to that is always free speech. Right? You are trying to stifle my voice, whether I'm a Nazi or a racist or a awful human being. I have a right to do that. And we can agree or disagree on that, by the way, and we should have a debate about that. But the thing I'm always baffled by that line is, well, what about the people whose voices are not on the internet because they are being bullied and harassed off of Twitter and off of Facebook and off of TikTok and off of whatever? So, we should have an open and honest debate about free speech, but, we often hear about the assholes on the internet fighting for their freedom of speech. But what I never hear about is those unspoken voices. How many women don't go onto Twitter because being a woman on Twitter is awful, right? And what about their voices? I want to hear their voices. And so we never hear it because they're literally the silent majority. And I would love to sort of understand that really the true space of free speech. And what are we missing out by allowing a bunch of assholes on the internet? That's my dissertation title. Good luck with the committee.
I'm curious about the in-home surveillance, and do I have to worry about my camera on
Yeah.
my computer? Is my phone listening to me while I take a talk? Do I need to put my iPhone in the microwave to keep myself safe?
There's a tin foil thing that you can put on your hat. It works really well. I think you are out of your mind if you have Alexa or what's the other one, Google one, Google Home. I think you are out of your mind, by the way, if you have one of those. First of all, there's overwhelming evidence that they're collecting data all the time. There's literally human beings listening to your conversations at the other end because they're using the data to train the AI algorithms. Of course they are. So I would never have one of those in the home. I think you're out of your mind if you have that. Whatever upside of that is, stick that thing in them. I like the microwave, by the way. I'm going to start putting my phone in the microwave. Look, we know with cell phones that you can remotely turn the microphone on. We can do this, right? We know this. I used to think that the people who put a sticker on their camera on their computer were just Looney Tunes. They're not so Looney Tunes anymore. I think you do have to worry about this. I think, and it's not just the hackers and the criminals, but it's also government surveillance and private surveillance. But absolutely, these things can be weaponized against you. You don't have to be out in public. They can be. I think it's a great question because we've been talking about it in public, but this stuff's happening in your home too. Yeah.
And the camera can update your facial profile.
Sure.
In your home. Sure. You get up to a minute info.
Sure.
Yeah, there's some state bills. One died last year and a very similar one this year that is definitely not going to be a cure-all, but that would force any of these technology manufacturers to have warning labels on the product that would tell you specifically, which will certainly be lobbied down, what type of data they're collecting, who they're sharing it with, what the retention would be, and so at least you would get some sort of notice. Which really isn't happening right now. The sort of big boogeyman right now is Amazon Ring. And there's a lot of heat on them and lawsuits, rightfully so. Apparently they didn't build any security into it. And you can go onto a Reddit channel and people will teach you how to hack into it and like demo it live. We've reached a whole new level of concern. And these products are everywhere. I walked into my buddy's house a while ago. He was using Alexa for everything in an Amazon Ring, and I was just terrified because I don't live that way. And he was totally comfortable with it, and his family was totally comfortable with it. He has very young children. I'm like, Amazon Ring's been hacked. They're oblivious to that, and ignorance is bliss, I guess. But it's amazing how some people so easily adopt that without even a thought. And I think that's on us to do a better job educating and putting out those warning labels and disclaimers, because I don't think people are intentionally making bad choices. They're ignorant. They don't know that the technology is doing these things. And so it's on us to educate them.
By the way, here's one thing that makes me crazy about this, because I was talking really about the business model, right? You understand the Facebooks and the Googles, they have to mine your data. But these are products that we are paying for, and they're so goddamn greedy, they can't help themselves, right? So it's not enough that they took the $49.99. Now they want your data too, right? So that's the stuff that makes me really crazy. Is I paid for the damn thing, and you're still trying to take my data. Now, once my toaster starts looking at me, I'm gonna give up, by the way. The toaster is where I draw the line.
All right, we'll have one last question and we'll wrap up.
So going off the business model, you mentioned a new business model of paying for content for privacy, and also people won't trust companies until they're regulated. So obviously, ideally, you want regulation and a new business model, but would you run into a chicken and egg problem?
Yeah, you absolutely do. No, it's absolutely the problem is that you sort of need both to merge at the same time. And so what you need is some non-cowardice VCs who say, you know what, we're going to do better. But the problem is, they're VCs and they're trying to do their thing, and their thing is to make a lot of money. And right now, data is profitable, right? And so I'm not super hopeful. I've been trying to convince the people at Wikipedia to just build a social media platform built on the Wikipedia model. I really like that idea, and by the way, I have no financial stake in Wikipedia. I know I'm just pushing my car, but I would love to see, something like that really sort of says, look, we do think that there is some value to social media. I'm not entirely convinced about that, but I understand. But let's just do a better job. But I think you're absolutely right. There is a chicken and egg problem, and I don't know how to solve that, particularly in light of all the lobbying efforts that are just killing any type of reasonable response, and the now trillion-dollar companies that can come in and just obliterate anybody who challenges them with a new business model. That's the problem with monopolies. Well, there's a lot of problems with monopolies. Usually it's bad for customers, right? When you have one airline, one automotive industry, one telecommunications, it's bad for us because they can jack up the prices. This is different, right? It's a different type of monopoly because this stuff is free for us, but they're stifling it down at the other end. So it's sort of an interesting realm in dealing with these monopolies. It's not in the classic form. It's not necessarily bad for us today in terms of our pocketbook. It's bad for us down the line in terms of what the innovations are.
Yeah, when consumer technology is now pennies, it's dirt cheap to get this stuff. Maybe one of the more effective strategies is antitrust enforcement. Start breaking up these behemoths. People like Brad Smith from Microsoft just frustrate the heck out of me. He's screaming very righteously about this race to the bottom and begging the government to come regulate them, and also going out and buying all these companies and selling the technology to bad actors.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing that at the same time.
And not paying their taxes.
Yes, also not paying taxes. So it does have to, I do think it has to emerge at the same time, and pretty much just like all of our problems, it's the lack of political will. We can fix it. There is a solution, but you guys didn't show up in both.
So it's your fault. On that note.
So I guess as a final question, to end on a more optimistic note, is what are you most hopeful for in this space? What are good, promising outcomes? What makes you feel good?
What makes me feel good, one, is never lost a vote. I think what we're pushing is practical. Granted, it's been in California, which is not, Mississippi, but there is a whole lot of success in states and cities and counties all across the country. And I think it took a good 3, 4, now 7 years, since Edward Snowden hit the front pages. But I do think there's a critical mass today to start taking this stuff serious. And every Cambridge Analytica and Clearview scandal just pours more gasoline on that fire in a good way. That I do think, and I'm just seeing all this legislation being introduced, that I do think we're really starting to tackle it. I am an optimist by nature, which I'm glad, because I'm in a dark space, dealing with this stuff. But I do really think we're making progress. I do think folks, I've got a lot of young siblings, and I talk to folks and they're like, they've never been on Facebook or they don't go on Instagram. It's like, youngsters have figured out, it's like, yeah, we know you're being tracked. You guys told us, and so we're not on those platforms. Like they get it. They've seen that. And that, I think, bodes well for the future. I met some of your students recently that were showing me some tools about how to obscure faces and other things. Some of my board members, I don't know if you probably know Steve Trush from high school. It's like, they're creating tools, some through my nonprofit, to try to sort of level the playing field. Like, let's go create the good Palantir, or let's go create tools for, public defenders that are out-resourced against the prosecutors. And so I think there are very smart people, technologists, that are working to make their products a whole lot better and safer. Also just choosing their business partners better, not selling to people that are going to go do bad stuff. Don't be negative.
All right, fine. Despite the fact that young people didn't go out and vote across the country, I'm going to say it one more time. I am actually optimistic about young people. and say what you will about millennials, and there's a lot to make fun of. I think they're frankly far more thoughtful about these issues than the previous generation. I mean, the fact that we're sitting here having this conversation, you guys are out on a Wednesday night having these conversations, I'm actually sort of optimistic about. I'm optimistic that young people who are sociologists, technologists, anthropologists, come and talk to me about these issues, and they care about it. I don't think it's enough just to care. I think you then have to sort of do the next thing, which is voting and doing something, and not going to work at Google or not going to work at Facebook, and voting with your feet, right? And making a difference that way. And generally optimistic about young people. I think they're pretty serious, and they're smart, and they're thinking about these stuff. The problem, of course, is that's a long road, right? That's 10, 20 years down the line. But, I think you said it earlier too, it's going to be slow. I mean, you get into trouble really fast and you get out of trouble really slowly. That's just sort of the way the world works. But I do think we're starting slowly to crawl out. I don't know if we've hit the low point, but I do think that there's enough awareness and enough concern, as you were saying, that I think we'll eventually get out the other end. I think it's just going to be a slog.
Well, and on that note, as a lot of young people in the room, you can talk to us afterwards about the Science Policy Group. You can also join us for our policy roundtable next week on this topic. One way to get involved beyond just caring. So with that, let's thank our speakers.